A hotel built as revenge became America's most beloved palace. The most famous hotel in the world was not built to welcome guests. It was built as a weapon. In the 1890s, William Waldorf Astor was furious with his aunt, Caroline Astor, the undisputed queen of New York society. She refused to acknowledge him as the family patriarch. She humiliated him publicly. She dismissed his wife. So William did something unthinkable. He demolished his own mansion on Fifth Avenue, right next to Caroline's home, and announced plans for a 13-story commercial hotel. The insult was deliberate. Hotels were vulgar. They represented commerce, middle-class travelers, noise, and chaos. Building one next to aristocratic residences was social warfare. William designed his hotel to be tall enough to cast shadows on Caroline's garden, loud enough to destroy her peace, visible enough to humiliate her every single day. The revenge worked. Caroline, the woman who decided who mattered in New York, was driven from her throne. She sold her mansion and fled uptown. William had won. But then something unexpected happened. Caroline's son, Jacob Astor IV, saw opportunity in the ruins of family warfare. He proposed building a second hotel on his mother's former property and connecting it to William's Waldorf. The two cousins made peace. They joined their hotels with a marble corridor called Peacock Alley, where society's elite strutted like birds displaying their plumage. The Waldorf-Astoria was born from hatred, but it became the center of the universe. And then, at the height of its glory, it was demolished to make way for something even more ambitious: the Empire State Building. This is the story of how a family feud created America's grandest hotel, how spite became splendor, and how even legends must fall. The story begins with a family. The Astors were not just wealthy, they were American royalty. The fortune started with Jacob Astor IV, a German immigrant who arrived in America after the Revolutionary War with almost nothing. He built an empire through fur trading, buying pelts from trappers and Native Americans, then shipping them to Europe and China where demand was insatiable. The profits were staggering. But Jacob understood something crucial. Fur trading was lucrative but temporary. Land was forever. He took his fur fortune and invested it in Manhattan real estate, buying property when the city was still small, when land was cheap, when others couldn't see the potential. He bought farmland, swamps, undeveloped lots. He held them as the city grew around his holdings. As Manhattan expanded northward, the Astor properties became increasingly valuable. The family didn't just own buildings. They owned blocks. They owned neighborhoods. By the mid-1800s, the Astors were the wealthiest family in America. Their fortune was measured not in millions, but in the modern equivalent of billions. They owned so much of Manhattan that rent from their properties alone generated enormous income. The Astor fortune grew automatically, compounding through real estate appreciation and rental income, while the family did essentially nothing. This was old money at its most powerful. But wealth alone doesn't make you royalty. That requires social power. That requires someone to decide who matters and who doesn't. Enter Caroline Astor. Caroline Webster. Schermerhorn married William Backhouse Astor Jr. in 1853. She was ambitious, intelligent, and understood that in America, where there were no kings or queens, social power was there for the taking. She decided to take it. Caroline established herself as the arbiter of New York society. She created rules. She decided who was acceptable and who wasn't. She hosted balls that became the most important social events of the year. An invitation to Caroline Astor's ball meant you had arrived. Exclusion meant you didn't matter. Her power was absolute within her sphere. She became known simply as the Mrs. Astor, not a Mrs. Astor, but the Mrs. Astor. The definite article was crucial. It signaled that she was the only one who mattered. Other Astor wives existed, but Caroline was the matriarch, the queen, the gatekeeper. Her most famous creation was the 400. This was the list of people who mattered in New York society. The number supposedly came from the capacity of Caroline's ballroom. Only 400 people could fit comfortably. Therefore, only 400 people mattered. If you weren't on the list, you were nobody. The 400 became legendary. Families desperate for social acceptance would do almost anything for inclusion. Caroline's power to grant or deny entry to this exclusive circle made her the most powerful woman in American society. She didn't hold political office. She didn't run businesses. But she controlled something arguably more important in Gilded Age America. She controlled status. Caroline's power rested on her position as the senior Mrs. Astor. But that position was about to be challenged. William Waldorf Astor was Caroline's nephew by marriage. He was the son of John Jacob Astor III, making him part of the main line of the family. William was educated, cultured, and ambitious. He had studied in Europe, served as a diplomat, and believed he understood the world better than the provincial New York society his aunt dominated. William had a problem. He believed that as the male head of the Astor family, he should be recognized as the family's leader. His wife should be the Mrs. Astor, not his Aunt Caroline. This wasn't just about ego. In the rigid social hierarchy of the Gilded Age, titles and recognition mattered enormously. Being the Mrs. Astor meant social power, invitations, influence, and respect. William's wife deserved that recognition. He deserved that recognition. But Caroline refused. She continued calling herself the Mrs. Astor. She continued acting as the family matriarch. She dismissed William's claims. She treated his wife as a junior member of the family, not as the rightful heir to Caroline's social position. The insult was public and ongoing. New York society watched the conflict. They sided with Caroline. She had established power. She had the ballroom. She had the 400. William was wealthy and educated, but he didn't have what Caroline had. He didn't have social dominance. The rejection infuriated William. He had wealth, education, diplomatic experience, and legitimate claim to family leadership. But his aunt, through sheer force of personality and established social power, refused to acknowledge him. The humiliation was unbearable. William made a decision. If Caroline wouldn't acknowledge him in New York society, he would leave America entirely. He would move to England, where his wealth would be appreciated and where he wouldn't have to deal with his aunt's dominance. But before he left, he would exact revenge. He would make Caroline's life miserable. He would destroy her peace. He would humiliate her, as she had humiliated him. William owned a mansion at 33rd Street and 5th Avenue. The location was prime real estate in the heart of New York's most fashionable neighborhood. More importantly, his mansion sat directly next to Caroline's residence. They were neighbors. Their properties shared a boundary. This proximity gave William an opportunity. In 1890, William announced his plans. He would demolish his mansion. In its place, he would build a hotel. Not a small, discreet hotel. A massive 13-story commercial hotel. The announcement shocked New York society. Hotels were commercial establishments. They catered to travelers, businessmen, and middle-class guests. They were noisy, busy, and decidedly not aristocratic. Building a hotel in the middle of the most exclusive residential neighborhood in New York was unthinkable. Building one directly next to Caroline Astor's mansion was an act of war. William hired Henry Janeway Hardenberg as his architect. Hardenberg was talented and experienced, known for designing substantial buildings in the German Renaissance style. William's instructions were clear. The hotel should be impressive, luxurious, and tall, especially tall. Tall enough to cast shadows on Caroline's garden, tall enough to loom over her mansion, tall enough to be a constant visible reminder of William's revenge. The design Hardenberg created was magnificent. 13 stories of brick and stone, with elaborate ornamentation, multiple turrets, and a commanding presence. The style was German Renaissance revival, featuring ornate details, varied roof lines, and a sense of European grandeur. The building would be impossible to ignore. It would dominate the neighborhood. It would transform Fifth Avenue from a quiet residential street into a commercial corridor. Caroline's peaceful existence would be destroyed. The hotel would bring constant traffic. Carriages would arrive and depart at all hours. Guests would come and go. Deliveries would be made. The noise would be constant. The activity would be endless. Caroline's garden, her sanctuary, would be cast in shadow by William's towering hotel. Her home, once the center of her social empire, would become an uncomfortable residence next to a busy commercial establishment. The message was clear. If Caroline wouldn't acknowledge William, he would make her life unbearable. Construction began in 1890. The demolition of William's mansion was symbolic. He was destroying his own property to spite his aunt. The foundation was dug. The steel frame rose. The walls went up. New York watched with fascination. The hotel was gossip fodder. Newspapers covered the construction. Society debated the propriety of William's actions. Some admired his boldness. Others condemned the vulgarity of building a commercial hotel in a residential neighborhood. But everyone agreed on one thing. This was revenge. Pure, calculated, architectural revenge. As the hotel rose, Caroline's situation became increasingly uncomfortable. The construction noise was constant. The view from her windows changed from neighboring mansion to rising hotel walls. The shadows lengthened across her garden. The reality of what William had done became inescapable. She was being driven out of her own home. The hotel opened in March 1893. The Waldorf Hotel was magnificent. The public spaces were lavish. The guest rooms were luxurious. The restaurants were excellent. The service was impeccable. William had spared no expense. The hotel wasn't just functional, it was spectacular. It was designed to be the finest hotel in America. And it was right next to Caroline's house. The Waldorf's success was immediate. Despite the scandal of its location, or perhaps because of it, the hotel became the place to be seen. The wealthy and fashionable flocked to the Waldorf. They dined in its restaurants. They attended events in its ballrooms. They stayed in its rooms when visiting New York. The hotel that was built as an insult became a social destination. Caroline's position became untenable. The noise was constant. The traffic was endless. Her garden was in shadow. Her home, once the center of New York society, was now next to the city's most fashionable hotel. The irony was bitter. Society was gathering at the Waldorf, not at Caroline's mansion. The hotel William built to spite her was stealing her social relevance. Caroline held out for a while. She was proud. She was stubborn. She was the Mrs. Astor. But eventually, even she had to admit defeat. The situation was unbearable. She couldn't live next to a hotel. She couldn't maintain her social position when society was gathering next door rather than in her ballroom. In 1893, Caroline sold her mansion. She moved uptown to 65th Street and 5th Avenue, far from the Waldorf, far from the noise, far from the humiliation. William had won. He had driven the Queen of New York from her throne. He had proven that even the most powerful social position could be undermined by determined revenge and unlimited wealth. Caroline's former mansion sat empty. The lot was vacant. William's hotel loomed next to the empty space where Caroline's home had stood. The victory was complete. But William didn't stay to enjoy it. He had already moved to England. He had executed his revenge and left America behind. He would live the rest of his life in England, eventually buying a castle and living as an English gentleman. He never returned to New York. The Waldorf Hotel continued operating, managed by others, a monument to family warfare. But the story doesn't end with William's victory, because Caroline had a son. John Jacob Astor IV was different from his mother and his cousin. He was practical, business-minded, and saw opportunity where others saw only family drama. John Jacob looked at the vacant lot where his mother's mansion had stood. He looked at the successful Waldorf Hotel next door. And he had an idea. What if, instead of continuing the family feud, he ended it? What if he built a second hotel on his mother's former property? What if he connected it to William's Waldorf? The two hotels could operate together, creating something unprecedented. The largest, most luxurious hotel in the world. John Jacob approached William with the proposal. The conversation must have been delicate. These were cousins who had been on opposite sides of a bitter family conflict. William had driven John Jacob's mother from her home. But business is business, and the proposal made financial sense. William agreed, but he insisted on one condition. The two hotels would be connected. but they could be separated if necessary. A clause was written into the agreement. If the Astor family feud reignited, the hotels could be divided. The connection between them could be sealed. Each hotel could operate independently. The agreement became known as the hyphen clause. In the hotels would be the Waldorf Astoria, with a hyphen connecting the names. But that hyphen could be removed if the family relationship fractured again. The clause was insurance against future conflict. Construction of the Astoria began in 1895. The architect was again Henry Hardenberg, ensuring architectural harmony between the two buildings. The Astoria would be even larger than the Waldorf, 17 stories instead of 13, more rooms, more public spaces, more grandeur. The Astoria was designed to complement the Waldorf while surpassing it. The two buildings would create a unified complex that would dominate the block. The connection between the buildings was crucial. Hardenberg designed a corridor linking the two hotels. The corridor was 300 feet long, running through the ground floors of both buildings. It was finished in marble, with ornate decoration and impressive scale. This corridor became known as Peacock Alley. The name was perfect. The corridor became the place where New York society paraded. Women wore their finest dresses. Men displayed their wealth through clothing and accessories. Walking through Peacock Alley was a performance. You went there to see and to be seen. The name Peacock Alley captured the essence of Gilded Age society. Everyone was a peacock, displaying their plumage, competing for attention and admiration. The corridor that connected two hotels built from family warfare became the stage for social theater. The Astoria opened in 1897. The combined Waldorf Astoria was now the largest hotel in the world. Over 1,000 rooms, multiple restaurants, grand ballrooms, luxurious public spaces, impeccable service. The hotel was unprecedented in scale and luxury. The Waldorf Astoria became the center of New York society. If you wanted to see and be seen, you went to the Waldorf Astoria. If you wanted to host an important event, you held it at the Waldorf Astoria. If you wanted to impress someone, you took them to the Waldorf Astoria. The hotel that began as revenge became an institution. The management of the Waldorf Astoria was innovative. The hotel pioneered concepts that became standard in luxury hospitality. Room service was perfected at the Waldorf Astoria. Guests could order meals delivered to their rooms at any hour. This was revolutionary. Previously, hotel guests had to dine in public restaurants. The Waldorf Astoria made private dining in your room not just possible, but elegant. The hotel's restaurants became legendary. The cuisine was excellent. The service was impeccable. The atmosphere was sophisticated. Dining at the Waldorf Astoria was an experience, not just a meal. Several dishes were invented at the Waldorf Astoria. The Waldorf salad, created by the hotel's maître d'hôtel Oscar Tschirky, became famous. The combination of apples, celery, walnuts, and mayonnaise was simple, but became iconic. Eggs Benedict was perfected if not invented at the Waldorf Astoria. Thousand Island dressing originated there. The hotel's culinary innovations spread to restaurants across America and eventually worldwide. Oscar Tschirky, known as Oscar of the Waldorf, became one of the most powerful men in New York. As the hotel's maître d'hôtel, Oscar controlled access to the best tables. He decided who sat where. He determined who received excellent service and who received merely good service. His favor was sought by everyone. Businessmen wanted Oscar's approval because deals were made at the Waldorf Astoria. Socialites wanted Oscar's favor because being recognized by Oscar meant you mattered. Politicians courted Oscar because the Waldorf Astoria was where power gathered. Oscar's power was subtle but real. He never held political office. He wasn't wealthy by Astor standards, but he controlled access and recognition in the space where New York's elite gathered. That made him indispensable. The guest list at the Waldorf Astoria read like a who's who of the Gilded Age and beyond. Presidents stayed at the Waldorf Astoria. Theodore Roosevelt was a regular. William Howard Taft visited frequently. Every president from the hotel's opening through its eventual closing had some connection to the Waldorf Astoria. Royalty visited when traveling to America. The Prince of Wales stayed at the Waldorf Astoria. European nobility considered it the only acceptable hotel in New York. The hotel became the American equivalent of the great European palace hotels. Industrial titans were regulars. John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, all frequented the Waldorf Astoria. Business deals worth millions were negotiated over dinner in the hotel's restaurants. Mergers were discussed in private dining rooms. Fortunes changed hands in conversations held in the Waldorf Astoria's luxurious spaces. The hotel became a stage for American ambition. If you had made your fortune and wanted to display your success, you went to the Waldorf Astoria. If you were climbing the social ladder and wanted to be recognized, you appeared at the Waldorf Astoria. If you were already at the top and wanted to maintain your position, you were seen regularly at the Waldorf Astoria. The building itself was magnificent. The exterior was imposing, with its German Renaissance styling, its height, its ornate details. The interior was even more impressive. The public spaces featured marble, ornate plasterwork, crystal chandeliers, and fine furnishings. Every detail was designed to impress. The ballrooms could accommodate hundreds of guests. Society events held at the Waldorf Astoria were the most important of the season. Debutante balls, charity galas, political fundraisers, all took place in the hotel's grand spaces. An event at the Waldorf Astoria had automatic prestige. The hotel's success vindicated Jacob Astor IV's vision. He had taken a family feud and turned it into a business triumph. The hotels that William built for revenge and Jacob built for profit became something greater than either man had imagined. They became an American institution. But Jacob Astor IV's story would end in tragedy. In April 1912, Jacob was returning from Europe with his young second wife, Madeline. The marriage had been controversial. Madeline was much younger than Jacob, and his divorce from his first wife had scandalized society. But Jacob was wealthy enough and powerful enough that society's disapproval was manageable. He and Madeline booked passage on a new ship for their return to New York. The ship was the largest and most luxurious ever built. It was considered unsinkable. The ship was the Titanic. On the night of April 14, 1912, the Titanic struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. The ship that couldn't sink was sinking. Jacob Astor IV helped his pregnant wife into a lifeboat. He asked if he could accompany her, given her condition. He was refused. The rule was women and children first. Jacob stepped back. He was last seen smoking a cigarette on the deck as the ship went down. His body was recovered days later. He was 47 years old. Jacob Astor IV's death was front-page news worldwide. He was one of the wealthiest men in America. His death on the Titanic became one of the most famous casualties of the disaster. The man who had united the Waldorf and Astoria hotels, who had turned family warfare into business success, died in the cold waters of the Atlantic. The Waldorf Astoria continued after Jacob's death. The hotel remained successful through the 1910s and into the 1920s. The Roaring Twenties were good years for the Waldorf Astoria. The hotel adapted to changing times. During Prohibition, when alcohol was illegal, the Waldorf Astoria reportedly operated speakeasies in hidden spaces. The wealthy and fashionable still wanted to drink, and the hotel accommodated them discreetly. The Jazz Age brought new energy to the hotel. The music changed. The fashions changed. The social rules relaxed somewhat, but the Waldorf Astoria remained the place to be seen. The hotel that had been built for Gilded Age society adapted to the faster, looser culture of the 1920s. But by the late 1920s, the neighborhood around the Waldorf Astoria was changing. Fifth Avenue in the 30s was becoming more commercial. Office buildings were replacing mansions. The residential character that had made the location exclusive was disappearing. The hotel that had driven Caroline Astor from her home was now surrounded by the commercial development it had helped trigger. The Waldorf Astoria's location, once its greatest asset, was becoming a liability. The hotel was valuable, but the land it sat on was even more valuable. Real estate developers looked at the large plot occupied by the hotel and saw opportunity. The site could accommodate something much more profitable than a hotel. It could accommodate the tallest building in the world. 1929, the Astor family made a decision. They would sell the Waldorf-Astoria property. The hotel would be demolished. The site would be redeveloped. The announcement shocked New York. The Waldorf-Astoria was an institution. It had been the center of New York society for over 30 years. The idea of demolishing it seemed unthinkable, but business was business. The offer for the property was too good to refuse. The buyers had ambitious plans. They would build a skyscraper on the site. Not just any skyscraper. The tallest building in the world. The Empire State Building. The Waldorf Astoria closed its doors in 1929. The final events were bittersweet. Regular guests came to say goodbye. Society figures who had spent decades at the hotel attended farewell parties. The closing felt like the end of an era. Because it was. The demolition began in 1929 and continued into 1930. The process took 18 months. The massive hotels that had taken years to build were systematically torn down. Fixtures and furnishings were sold at auction. Pieces of the Waldorf Astoria were scattered to other hotels, private homes, and collectors. People wanted souvenirs of the legendary hotel. The marble from Peacock Alley was salvaged. The ornate plasterwork was carefully removed where possible. The crystal chandeliers were sold. Everything of value was stripped from the building before the structure itself was demolished. The demolition was thorough. The hotels that had dominated the block were reduced to rubble. The site was cleared. The foundation for the Empire State Building was prepared. The transformation from hotel to skyscraper site took less than 2 years. The Empire State Building rose quickly. Construction began in March 1930. The building was completed in May 1931, just over 13 months from start to finish. The speed was remarkable, a testament to American engineering and construction capability during the Depression. The Empire State Building was everything promised. At 1,454 feet, including its antenna, it was the tallest building in the world. It would hold that title for nearly 40 years. The building became instantly iconic. The Art Deco design, the dramatic height, the prominent location, all made the Empire State Building one of the most recognizable structures on Earth. The site where family warfare had created a legendary hotel now held a building that symbolized American ambition and capability. The irony was profound. William Waldorf Astor had demolished his mansion to build a hotel as revenge against his aunt. That hotel had become beloved. Then it was demolished to build something even more ambitious. The cycle of destruction and creation, of old giving way to new, played out on the same plot of land across 4 decades. But the Waldorf Astoria story didn't end with demolition. The hotel was too valuable as a brand and institution to simply disappear. Plans were made for a new Waldorf Astoria in a different location. The new Waldorf Astoria opened in 1931 on Park Avenue between 49th and 50th Streets. The new building was Art Deco rather than German Renaissance. It was taller than the original, with 47 stories. It was more modern, with updated amenities and systems, but it carried the name and tradition of the original. The new Waldorf Astoria became successful in its own right. It hosted presidents, royalty, celebrities, and business leaders just as the original had. The Peacock Alley name was revived for a corridor in the new hotel. The traditions continued in a new building, but the new Waldorf Astoria was different. It was built as a hotel, not as revenge. It was designed for modern times, not for Gilded Age society. It was successful and prestigious, but it lacked the origin story that made the original so compelling. The original Waldorf Astoria was born from family hatred. It rose from spite and became beloved despite its origins. That story, that transformation from weapon to institution, gave the original hotel a narrative power the new building couldn't replicate. The new Waldorf Astoria operated successfully for decades. It remained one of New York's premier hotels through the mid-20th century and beyond. But it too eventually faced challenges. Changing economics, shifting travel patterns, and evolving hospitality industry dynamics affected even the legendary Waldorf-Astoria. In 2014, the Waldorf-Astoria was sold to a Chinese insurance company. The sale price was nearly $2 billion, reflecting the property's value in modern Manhattan. The new owners announced plans to convert most of the hotel to luxury condominiums, with a smaller hotel operation remaining. The conversion began in 2017. The Waldorf-Astoria closed to guests for renovation and conversion. As of this writing, the building remains closed, being transformed from hotel to primarily residential use. The cycle continues. Hotels become condominiums. Buildings change purpose. Nothing remains static in New York real estate. Looking back across the full story, the arc is remarkable. A family feud in the 1890s led William Waldorf Astor to build a hotel as revenge. That act of spite created one of the most famous hotels in the world. The hotel that began as an insult became an institution. Then it was demolished for the Empire State Building, which became even more iconic. The site at 33rd Street and 5th Avenue has been home to mansions, to legendary hotels, and to one of the world's most famous skyscrapers. Each iteration reflected the ambitions and values of its era. The mansions represented Gilded Age aristocracy. The Waldorf-Astoria represented Gilded Age grandeur and the transformation of American society. The Empire State Building represented Depression-era determination and American engineering prowess. The story reveals fundamental truths about ambition, revenge, and unintended consequences. William Waldorf Astor built his hotel to hurt his aunt. He succeeded in driving her away. But the hotel he built as a weapon became something he never intended. It became beloved. It became an institution. It outlived the feud that created it. Jacob Astor IV saw opportunity in family ruins. He built the Astoria and connected it to the Waldorf, creating something unprecedented. His business acumen turned family warfare into commercial success. But he died tragically on the Titanic, never seeing the full legacy of what he created. The Waldorf-Astoria itself had a life cycle. Birth from revenge, growth into institution, decline as the neighborhood changed, death by demolition, rebirth in a new location. Each phase reflected changing New York and changing America. The buildings we create outlive their creators' intentions. William wanted revenge. He got a legendary hotel. The Astor family wanted profit. They got an institution that defined an era. The developers who demolished the hotel wanted the world's tallest building. They got an icon that has defined New York's skyline for nearly a century. The original Waldorf Astoria is gone. The building was demolished in 1929. But the story remains. The story of how family hatred created beauty, how spite became splendor, how revenge transformed into legacy. The Empire State Building stands today where the Waldorf Astoria once stood. Millions of people visit it annually. They ride to the observation deck. They look out over New York. They take photographs. Most don't know that beneath their feet, in the foundations and in the history of the site, lies a story of family warfare and architectural revenge. The site has seen mansions, hotels, and skyscrapers. It has witnessed Gilded Age society, Roaring Twenties excess, Depression-era determination, and modern tourism. The ground itself is just Manhattan bedrock. But the human stories played out on that ground reveal essential truths about ambition, family, revenge, and the unintended consequences of our actions. Caroline Astor wanted to maintain her social power. She was driven from her home by her nephew's revenge. William Waldorf Astor wanted to humiliate his aunt. He created a beloved hotel instead. Jacob Astor IV wanted to make money and end a family feud. He succeeded but died tragically young. The Waldorf Astoria wanted to be the finest hotel in the world. It succeeded, then was demolished for something even more ambitious. Every ambition achieved came with unexpected consequences. Every victory was temporary. Every building, no matter how grand, eventually faced obsolescence or destruction. But the stories endure. The Waldorf-Astoria's story is ultimately about transformation. Hatred transformed into hospitality, revenge transformed into institution, buildings transformed from mansions to hotels to skyscrapers. Each transformation reflected human ambition, human conflict, and human creativity. We build to express ourselves. We build to compete. We build to leave legacies. But what we build takes on lives of its own, meaning beyond our intentions, purposes beyond our plans. The Waldorf Astoria was built as a weapon. It became a palace. It was demolished for progress. It was reborn elsewhere. And through all these transformations, it remained a symbol of American ambition, excess, creativity, and the endless cycle of destruction and creation that defines New York and America itself. The hotel is gone. The story remains. And perhaps that's the ultimate legacy. Buildings fall, stone crumbles. Even the grandest structures eventually face the wrecking ball. But stories, if told well, if remembered, if passed down, can outlive any building. The Waldorf Astoria's story will outlive even the Empire State Building that replaced it. Because the story contains something buildings cannot. It contains human drama, human emotion, human folly, and human triumph. It contains the messy, complicated, fascinating reality of how we live, how we fight, how we build, and how we're remembered. The most famous hotel in the world was built as revenge. It became beloved. It was destroyed. It was reborn. And its story, the story of the Waldorf Astoria, reminds us that our grandest creations often come from our basest motivations, and that what we build in anger can become, against all odds, something beautiful. If you enjoyed uncovering the scandalous origins of America's most famous hotel, subscribe to the channel for more untold stories of ambition, revenge, and the hidden dramas that shaped history. And if this tale of family warfare and architectural spite fascinated you, hit that like button and leave a comment telling us which historical feud you'd like us to explore next. Your support keeps these forgotten stories alive.